Have you ever wondered if people see colors differently than you? People who are colorblind don't have to wonder. They know they have a unique way of looking at the world. In this lesson, we're going to talk about pedigrees and inheritance patterns. So, our traits are not only dependent on the genetic information, but also from the environment. So, things like Siamese cats, even though they have a trait to make their ear tips and tail tips dark, that actually doesn't occur until they're a little bit older, and those are cooler areas of their body. So the environment helps trigger the genes to change their hair color. Traits that are the result of genes are called inherited traits, and we also have traits that come from interaction from the environment, which are called acquired traits. And sometimes, like the Siamese cat, it's a combination of both. So when we look at chromosomes coming in pairs, um, each homologous pair contains an alternate form of the gene that have to do with the same characteristic. And these alternate genes are called alleles. And sometimes we can have two of the same alleles or two of different alleles. So we can have an allele for blue eyes and one for brown eyes. Or we can have an allele that we can roll our tongue or we cannot. And individuals have two alleles for every trait, one from each chromosome, and it's located on a specific site of a homologous chromosome. So those alleles may both be on the bottom part of chromosome 5, for example, or the top part of chromosome 7. When Gregor Mendel studied the plants in his garden, he showed that crossing a purple flower with a purple flowered pea plant with a white flowered pea plant produced only purpled flowers. So he determined that the purple flower was dominant. So a dominant allele overpowers a recessive allele, and an individual typically only needs one dominant allele for that dominant trait to be expressed. So if you have one purple flower allele and one white flower allele in your pea plant, you're going to appear purple. White is going to be a recessive trait, meaning that the recessive allele, or the white color, is not expressed if the dominant allele is present. So, in order for that recessive trait to be expressed, both alleles have to be recessive. So, when we look at individuals and their genes, you can either be homozygous or heterozygous with alleles. So, if you have two of the same alleles, you could be homozygous dominant or homozygous recessive. And when we demonstrate our alleles, we use capital letters for a dominant trait and lowercase letters for a recessive trait. However, we typically choose a letter associated with the dominant trait. So for this example, capital P is going to mean purple, lowercase p will mean a white allele. When an organism possesses one dominant allele and one recessive allele for a trait, that individual is referred to as heterozygous because they have one of each allele. So we can use a tool called a Punnett square to predict the possibility of the offspring having particular genotypes. So a Punnett square is a table that uses the allele of the parents to indicate the possible outcomes resulting from fertilization. So if we had a homozygous dominant or purple plant, and then we had a homozygous recessive white plant, we're going to breed. And so the purple plant could only produce purple alleles, and the white plant can only produce white alleles or lowercase p. So I'm just going to erase those lines here so we can see what goes underneath in our Punnett square. So when we fill in the steps of our Punnett square, we can see that all of the offspring have one allele from each parent, and all of the offspring in the first generation happen to be heterozygous. So they have one dominant and one recessive allele, which is why they will all appear purple. Now, when we're expressing a trait, this is known as phenotype. So the phenotype of these individuals is going to be purple, but the genotype could be homozygous dominant, heterozygous. The phenotype of a white flower will be white, while the genotype of that white flower is going to be two recessive alleles. So not all traits are controlled by only one gene and have only two alleles. So hair and eye color appear to have many forms because they're controlled by more than one pair of genes. And as these genes interact, we get different colors of eyes, like blue, brown, hazel, gray, silver, and amber. Blood type is also controlled by more than two alleles. So people can have blood types A, B, O, or AB. O is a recessive gene and can be masked by either an A allele or a B allele. So an individual who's blood type A could either have two A alleles or they could have an A and an O. Same thing with an individual who's blood type B can have two B alleles or could have one O. A and B are not dominant over each other, they're co-dominant. So if an individual has one A and one B, they would be blood type AB. For an individual to be blood type O, they would have to have two O alleles. Sometimes there are traits that are associated with the X chromosome. So not only do X and Y determine gender, but they can also carry other genes. Genes that are found on the sex chromosomes but are not responsible for primary secondary sex characteristics are referred to as sex-linked inherited genes. Genes that are carried on the other 22 pairs of chromosomes are responsible for autosomal inheritance because they'll affect men and women equally. When we look at color blindness, this is a sex-linked trait. The gene for color blindness is found on the X chromosome, and we can illustrate this in a Punnett square. So when we write our alleles for sex-linked traits, what we want to do is we want to write X's and Y's so we can determine which alleles come from the female, which would be these two X alleles, and these two alleles come from the male because there's a Y. This way we can determine what gender the offspring are who are affected or who are carriers. So we'll write X or Y as our main allele, and then we'll have a superscript of normal vision or abnormal vision, so that would be colorblind. As we fill in our Punnett square, we can see that we have two females who are unaffected, but they carry the recessive allele. And we have two males who are unaffected by this condition because they got a normal color vision allele from the mother. So when we show those sex-linked ones, make sure you're including your X and Y chromosome so you can see the gender of the offspring.